100,000 years ago, your first bite of solid food wouldn't have come from a bowl of porridge or a slice of bread. It wouldn't be sweet. It wouldn't be warm comfort. It would be raw, metallic, and thick with steam. A mouthful of brain matter, freshly scooped from the skull of a dead animal. Your elders would have cracked that skull open with a stone, pried it apart with bare hands, and handed you the fatty treasure inside. No salt, no flame, just instinct. Back then, evolution didn't care about taste. It cared about survival. The brain was nature's multivitamin, loaded with fats, omega-3s, and nutrients your infant body needed to build a nervous system, to fuel a growing mind. You wouldn't have spit it out in disgust. You would have swallowed it, warm and unchewed, the way every child in your tribe did. Because in the Ice Age, food wasn't pleasure, it was power. And the brain was the most powerful food of all. Forget the Hollywood hunt. Our ancestors didn't dine on roaring fires and fresh steaks under starlight. That's a myth. They ate what didn't flee, what lay still, what was already half digested by time and flies. The real Ice Age diet was about what you could scavenge, not what you could chase. It meant tugging sinew from a sun-bloated carcass, scooping maggots from a bloated gut, gnawing on liver gone soft and sour with age. They ate the fatty parts first, not because they were tender, but because they were dense with life-saving calories. There was no luxury of disgust. A meal was anything that didn't kill you, yet. The smell of rot didn't drive them away. It drew them in. Decay meant fat. Writhing meant protein. Insects, gristle, half-congealed blood. These weren't last resorts. They were staples. Daily fuel. In that world, survival had a taste. And it wasn't clean. We turn our noses up at it now. The smell, the slime, the bitter rot. But for your ancestors, these were the flavors of survival. The texture that makes your stomach churn today once meant your blood stayed warm through a freezing night. That sour, slick layer on aging fat, that was fuel. That tang of old marrow, gone slightly off, that was hope. The modern world has taught us to recoil from nature's rawness, to call it disgusting, unclean, inedible. But that's the great misunderstanding. Disgust is a luxury of the full-bellied. Your ancestors didn't have that luxury. They couldn't afford to be squeamish. The food that built our species didn't come in clean packaging. It dripped, it wriggled, it stank, and it saved lives. You are here not in spite of it, but because of it. Every cell in your body was forged by generations who learned to stomach what we now fear. Civilization gave you manners, evolution gave you instincts, and instinct never gagged at survival. Modern man sees insects as a dare, a stunt, a novelty at best, a nightmare at worst. But for early Homo sapiens and Neanderthals, bugs weren't plan B. They were the plan. Insects weren't a last resort. They were a reliable food source, everywhere, every season, and with no risk of injury. While larger prey ran, kicked, bit, and bled, insects simply waited. Beneath rotting logs, inside tree bark, crawling under rocks. No weapons needed, no teamwork, no fire, just reach, grab, eat. Beetles, termites, larvae. These weren't gross. They were gold. Tiny, squirming packages of protein, fat, and micronutrients your ancestors couldn't afford to pass up. And when winter came, and the mammoths vanished into snow, the bugs stayed. We look down on insect eating as a mark of poverty or desperation. But that's the lens of comfort talking. Back then, it was strategy. it was efficiency. And in a world where every calorie counted, the bug was the bounty. When ancient hunters brought down an animal, the meat wasn't the trophy. The muscle was heavy, slow to rot, hard to carry. But hidden inside the skull was something far more precious: the brain, a small fatty organ that packed more value per ounce than anything else on the body. This wasn't just food, it was fuel for the future. Loaded with omega-3 fatty acids, choline, saturated fat, and vitamin B12, the brain fed more than the belly. It fed the mind. These nutrients were the building blocks of intelligence, of memory, of focus, of higher thought. You didn't just eat brain to stay alive. You ate brain to become something more. And unlike muscle, the brain was resilient. Protected inside bone, it kept longer. You could crack the skull days after the kill and still find it edible. It didn't just nourish, it endured. This is why skulls were carried home when limbs were left behind. Not for ritual, not for pride, but because inside was power, and the mind that consumes mind evolves. We often talk about tools as the turning point in human evolution. But what if the truth lies deeper, in the very way we held the food that mattered most? Modern research reveals something astonishing. The act of cracking skulls to get to the brain didn't just feed us, it physically shaped us. Breaking through thick bone with stone tools wasn't easy. It demanded strength, precision, and control. Over thousands of generations, those repeated motions changed the human hand itself. Anthropologists now believe that the power grip, the thumb-to-finger hold that lets us swing hammers, wield weapons, and write our names, was refined not in the forge, but in the feast. Each time our ancestors smashed open a skull, twisted bone apart, or scooped soft tissue from within, they trained the very muscles and joints that would come to define our species. This wasn't just dinner, it was adaptation. We didn't just evolve to eat brains, we evolved because we did. In the harsh world of the Ice Age, motherhood wasn't sacred, it was strategic. Every pregnancy was a gamble. Every child born was a fragile flame in a world of ice and hunger. Survival wasn't guaranteed, not for the mother, not for the unborn. But there was one source of hope: the brain inside another creature's skull. Among ancient tribes, brain tissue wasn't reserved for the strongest hunters or the tribe's elders. It was often given first to pregnant women and small children, not out of sentiment, but out of necessity. Fat-soluble vitamins like K2, B12, and choline, all critical for fetal development, neurological function, and immune strength, are nearly absent in plants. But the brain? The brain had them in abundance. Without these nutrients, miscarriages rose. Babies were stillborn. Young children fell behind, physically and mentally. But with them, life had a chance. A mother's future, and the future of the tribe, rested in her ability to digest another species' mind. They ate with dirt still on their hands, larvae still wriggling in the marrow, and in that mud and blood, they gave birth to us. We imagine the dawn of man huddled around fire, roasting meat beneath stars. But for hundreds of thousands of years before fire became common, humans ate raw, because hunger doesn't wait for heat. They tore strips of meat straight from the bone. They slurped marrow, slathered in mud. They popped beetles into their mouths, still twitching, still coated in the excrement of whatever corpse they had fed on. There was no seasoning, no sterilization, just instinct, and the pressing need to feed. In winter, when large prey vanished and the land turned silent, They turned to what remained. Fatty larvae, juicy grubs writhing under bark, pockets of semi-decomposed flesh hidden from the frost. These weren't appetizers, they were the core of survival. Every squirming mouthful brought fat to the brain, calories to the bloodstream. And in a world where a single night without nourishment could mean death, raw meant ready. Fire would come. Civilization would come. But first, there was just cold, hunger, and the courage to eat. Across the vast sprawl of Paleolithic Eurasia, from the savannas of ancient Ethiopia to the rocky hills of prehistoric Israel, archaeologists have uncovered a haunting pattern. Limbs left behind, skulls carried away. Time and again, the same story emerges in the dirt. The kill site bears bones, but the heads are gone. Not for worship, not for trophies, but for what lay inside, the brain, shielded by bone, rich in fat, and packed with the nutrients that made survival possible. At a time when meat rotted quickly and predators lurked nearby, the skull was nature's container. It kept the most valuable part of the animal safe, portable, and edible days after the rest had spoiled. Carrying a brain home wasn't superstition. It was strategy. Even 800,000 years ago in the wilds of early Africa, humans knew where true nourishment lived. And by 400,000 years ago, they were practicing this knowledge with consistency across continents. Skull harvesting wasn't a ritual. It was a survival system, an unspoken culture shared across species, climates, and millennia. A universal code etched not in words, but in bone. You can lie with words, you can even lie with bones, but you can't lie with what comes out the other end. We know our ancestors ate insects not because of stories passed down, but because of what they left behind. In caves, in latrines, in layers of sediment untouched for millennia, scientists have found fossilized feces, paleofeces, preserved like ancient confessions. Inside them, the unmistakable traces of a bug-based diet, fragments of chitin shells, wing casings, tiny leg segments still recognizable after tens of thousands of years. These weren't accidents. These weren't swallowed by mistake. They were chewed, digested, consumed deliberately. And it doesn't stop with the gut. In the hardened dental plaque of humans who lived 30,000 years ago, researchers have discovered microscopic insect remains, locked in tartar like tiny fossils in amber. Even in death, their mouths told the truth. They ate what they had to eat. And thanks to their waste, we know it. Your mind, this miracle of memory, imagination, and calculation, wasn't forged in temples or libraries. It was built in the mud, by hands slick with blood, tearing through tissue to find what was warm, fatty, and alive. What nourished the brains of your ancestors wasn't grilled or garnished. It was raw, often rotting, crawling with bacteria and maggots. But within that grotesque feast was the fuel of cognition. Fat, cholesterol, omega-3s, choline. The very compounds your brain still demands today were once scavenged from the heads of dead animals and the bellies of beetles. They didn't eat for pleasure. They ate for capacity. To think, to plan, to remember. Without that grim diet, there would be no civilizations, no music, no language, no invention, no painters, no engineers, no storytellers, no one to wonder where we came from. You are not the product of clean eating. You are the descendant of those who survived by swallowing what others would scream at, and they did it not out of madness, but out of design. You are built from meat and maggots, And that's why you think. You flinch at rot, gag at slime, turn away from the crawl of a beetle or the drip of marrow. But that instinct to recoil is not ancient. It's recent. It's learned. A product of polished tables, fluorescent lights, and expiration dates. Evolution didn't flinch. It taught your ancestors to crave what we now fear. The wriggling, the raw, the bloody, the warm brain sliding from a shattered skull. They didn't eat these things because they were desperate. They ate them because they worked. Because that menu, brains, bugs, blood, and bone, was not disgusting. It was effective. And so they survived. And not just survived, they evolved. Each bite built better cognition. Each fatty insect, each bite of rancid fat, gave rise to longer memories, sharper reflexes, the slow miracle of consciousness. You are not a break from that lineage. You are its culmination. You are the final dish, the sum of all the ancient meals that came before, still walking, still thinking, still hungering for more than just food. So when you look back at what they ate, don't judge. Honor it. Because what you eat is not who you are. What they ate is why you exist. The ice remembers, and so do we. At Prehistoric Shadows, we believe evolution wasn't polished. It was primal. We weren't built by clean kitchens or balanced diets. We were forged by blood, bone, and instinct. The truth is uncomfortable. Civilization is recent. Survival is ancient. Our brains, our bodies, our very capacity for thought were shaped not by convenience, but by what we dared to consume. This channel isn't about glorifying the past. It's about confronting it, understanding it, and recognizing that deep within us still lives the cold, calculating survivor who once cracked skulls for warmth and swallowed grubs for wisdom. We're not just telling history. We're decoding the blueprint of who we are. If that story matters to you, stay curious, stay human, stay wild. Join us.